And we are back on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTK.com. It's 9 o'clock on a Thursday. It's time for the MGoBlog Roundtable here on the ticket. And joining me this morning, Seth Fisher. Good morning, Seth. How are you?
Hey, I actually slept last night. It's a new experience for me. I'm going to try it again.
Actual sleep. That's squeeze it in when you can. Brian, good morning. Brian Cook's with us, of course, as well. How are you, Brian?
Brian's quiet. Brian's he did this last week too.
Unmute yourself, Brian.
On the screen. There we go. How are you, Brian? Now you're good.
Nope.
I don't know.
I can't hear him either.
All right, we're going to figure this out. In the meantime, welcome back to the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTK.com. I don't think that's ever happened. I don't think we've ever experienced because we were all talking, getting ready for the segment, and it was gone. Unfortunately, for Darren, who posted in the chat here, he was hoping for story time with Craig. No Craig Ross this morning. So unfortunately, that is not going to happen. No Craig Ross. He is unavailable, just like Sam is on a boat. I'm not sure actually where Craig is. He just said he was unavailable. But this morning, because so many people, Seth, have been talking to us about wanting to talk actual football. Football. Amazing. In the offseason, we could actually talk football. We haven't really done that.
I think talking football is overrated, Ira. I think that the football team should probably actually all the NCAA should just take a year off. Like, it's been a lot of changes, right? We just had a great champion. We had, all these teams moving around. We got NIL. There's a lot to digest. They should just kind of take 12 months off, digest it all. We'll celebrate the last champion. We'll put out a nice yearbook for about last year. We can all talk about last year, for another season, and then we'll come back and we'll have Jaden Davis will have a red shirt, and then we'll have more football. I think that's the right way to do this.
Yeah, we just football. It's nice to actually get to that point in time where we can just enjoy football and the football season and not the other stuff.
All right. We'll have a football season.
Yeah,
what do you want to know? What do we want to know? We actually have begun previewing this year's team, even though I'm still working on my book about last year's team.
Well, this is what is the most unique of all the season kickoffs that we've had, because while the last couple we've really enjoyed, the season, actually the last couple, right? We've enjoyed the beginning of the season. You're celebrating the first Big Ten championship in a while, and that first game, the next season and the beginning of 22 or the beginning of last year, you're celebrating back-to-back championships. But you're really also, there was a lot of moving, looking forward because of the what ifs and the missing outs the previous 2 years in the playoff. Coming in this year, while we are looking forward, that first game in 16 days that night, there's going to be a lot of celebration, right? There's going to be a lot of looking back over the course of the year and thinking about what happened over the course of the year as we turn the page to move forward. It's going to be a real kind of a combination of the both. But no Jim Harbaugh. He will not be the honorary captain. He's going to stay in California, focus on his team. Jack and Jackie, who are amazing fill-ins for Jim, will be the honorary captains here for the game instead. It's going to be a lot of fun that night.
Yeah, I think that if you see Surrender Cobras on TV from Michigan fans, it's not like, oh my God, we are relaxing. We are leaning back. We got our hands clasped behind our heads, and it's just okay, come at me season. This is going to be fun. We'll see we'll see what Texas looks like without their defensive tackles. We'll see if we can beat Oregon, who looks really good this year, and then we'll beat Ohio State again, and it'll be nice.
And then you'll have to take your 3-year book and turn it into a 4-year book. Brian, you with us now? Is it working?
I hope so.
There we go. There we go. All right. So now that you guys are both here, quickly give everybody an update on the 3-year book and how things are going.
It's written with almost written. There's maybe a couple of pieces that we're still thinking
table
about.
Of contents kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, and we'll send it to the printer in a couple of weeks, and then a few weeks after that, they'll start shipping out. So by mid-season, everybody who's ordered the book should have it. And we're apologetic that it's taken this long. It was a bigger project than we thought it was going to be. But the finished product, I think everybody is going to be really happy with.
it does slow you down a little bit when you have a lot of great information to put in there and you're celebrating all the time. So I get it. It's all good. I think everybody understands
Well-
because we're all in the same celebratory boat.
We just put together the 6-page article on the Rose Bowl, which by the way has more articles after that about the Rose Bowl too. But this is just on the game itself. And first of all, it's a gorgeous layout by Courtney, but also like the intelligence that went into that game. Like you want to talk about greatest games in the history of University of Michigan football. That's my choice for number one, and there are some really good ones out there to compete with.
And we're not talking about our intelligence.
Yeah,
we're talking
no.
about
and yes, you can still order the book. Go to mgoblog.com/victors and you'll find it there.
Awesome. And we will continue to celebrate, as I said, in 16 days, that party, as everyone gets back together, the long day of tailgating. And I always call it the big family reunion after 10 months, as we get back together at the Corner Stadium in Maine. The new signage underneath the north and south giant M's with the home of the national champ signage. There'll be a lot of pictures taken that day as well. So it'll be a lot of fun looking back on that day. But that day, of course, is also the beginning of what is next. And I know we're pretty excited about what's coming now that we're inside 2.5 weeks to Michigan football. And I think that as we start to go through this camp, it's, as we were talking yesterday, it's still talking season, right? Like we don't get to go to practice and we don't see a whole lot. So it's talking season. What are people saying? What are, whether it's at press conferences or what are people saying behind closed doors that we get to hear? And we're going to actually talk about that stuff here on the show. I'm kind of using Sharon's comments on Tuesday as a launching point, going through the Michigan roster a little bit and talking about where things stand, what you have heard, what you want to hear, maybe still concerns, that kind of thing. We'll start where I think a lot of people's attention is, which is at quarterback. And it sounds like it's still, what did Sharon say? Still a competition. And then I know part of what he says is they're not going to announce it maybe even until game day. And that's an old Jim Harbaugh thing that, Michigan loves to play that close to his vest. But but what are you guys hearing and thinking about the quarterback position as we're now a couple of weeks from the season?
Well, I mean, everybody continues to say that it's Alex Orji probably going to get the job because he is the guy who brings the one indisputable thing that is elite, and that's his athleticism, his ability to run the ball. And, the one thing that I think is new that we've started hearing is that, in terms of like guys you want to follow, like leaders in the room, that he is like close to the ideal. So that's something that I think will play in. But for Orji, it's always going to just come down to like how consistent can he be with the throws, because we know he can make the throws, but the it's if it's 3rd and 7, is Alex Orji your best option at quarterback? If it's 3rd and 2, I know he is, right? There's no question about that. But and the other thing is like Orji is probably going to be a very different quarterback than Davis Warren or Jack Tuttle. So if it is Orji, how much are you leaning into the fact that your quarterback is going to be running the ball a significant amount, and you need to incorporate reads in the run game, and you need to do a bunch of stuff. You need to rep a bunch of stuff more heavily than you would rep things under Jack Tuttle or Davis Warren. So it's a conundrum, but it feels like he's going to start the first game. But I'd be surprised if we actually see anything in game 1 that we haven't seen from JJ McCarthy's offense. Because if they do have a plan to create the Alex Orji offense and make him the centerpiece, we're not going to see that until Texas, right? Because we don't want to tell Texas that, hey, you got to prepare for all this stuff. No, it's going to be duo. It's going to be drop back passing. So I think we're going to be in the dark about the direction Michigan has taken this until about the 3rd quarter of the Texas game.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating that we didn't get to see Orji throw the ball at all last year. Like they had a lot of Tuttle time, and they could have used it if they looked at their depth chart last year and realized who they were going to get. It was quite obvious that JJ was heading towards the NFL, or like that was a high possibility, and that Tuttle, they didn't even think Tuttle was going to be available. But they spent a lot of time last year having Tuttle just kind of clean up games, and it would have been nice for us as previewers to see what Alex Orji looks like throwing the ball downfield, because what they're going to do as soon as they realize that that's what he is, right? That they know what he is. They're going to prepare a lot of 8 men in the box, and they're going to ask him to throw against single coverage. So, how accurate is he? How well does he identify where his guys are, where the help is and where the help isn't? And they're saying in practice that he can see it, but we've literally not seen him throw a pass.
Yeah, that does the lack of experience in game action, in particular for Alex Orji, is something that obviously is of concern. The Tuttle thing still is just so intriguing. He's a guy who he lost college jobs to Michael Penix and JJ McCarthy, right? Like, it's not like he was, losing jobs to slouches, but he just can't stay healthy, and he's like 38 or 39 years old at this point in time. I like what he brings to the room. Are we dismissing Davis Warner altogether? Should he be discussed in this conversation? I know this morning I discussed him because he's in the countdown. We're 16 Davis Warner days away at the start of the season. But is he more of he's really good in that room, he's really good as your number 2 or your number 3, but we shouldn't be thinking about him as the number 1, or should we not discount him in that conversation?
No, I wouldn't discount him. Like the one thing that he does have definitively over Tuttle is that he's been able to remain healthy this year. And Tuttle missed spring, and there were some questions about his availability this fall that I think Sherrone Moore dispelled. But, if you're looking at who your number 2 is, it's going to be hard for Tuttle to keep that job if he gets dinged up again, right? Just because he's got this history at this point. So, I think Warren is going to be an important piece, and I wouldn't. From what we've seen of Warren, like, I think that he is capable enough to be a starter on this team, and just kind of, Cade McNamara his way to success, because I don't necessarily think he's going to be a dynamic playmaker who's going to be the first pick of the draft. But this defense doesn't need a whole lot of points to win games. So if he's consistent, takes care of the ball, gets Michigan in the right plays, yeah, he's got a shot.
Yeah, the thing about Davis Warren is he's not a Cade McNamara at all. He's a downfield threat, right? Like, he likes to throw the ball down. We just don't have the receivers, I don't think, to like have the kind of offense. Now, he can run too. We've seen him get out in the edge, and I think in spring game we actually got to see him run a few times. He's had a couple tremendous spring games, and then when he came in, was it Minnesota? He was just awful. So I think the decision making is the question there.
Well, he was hurt most of last year, so.
Mm-hmm.
That's another reason that we saw more of Jaden Denegal, who's not really in the conversation this year. So he was seeing snaps last year because Warren wasn't fully healthy. So his performance a year ago, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into, just because it was a limited number of snaps, and I don't think that he was full go for it. So, I from what we've seen in spring, I think Warren could handle the job if necessary. But obviously Michigan wants to go with the guy with the highest upside, and that's Alex Orji.
Yeah.
When we hear from Sherrone in the next week or so, what do you want him to say? Or maybe even that first Monday press conference of the game week, what do you want him to say about the quarterback position at that point?
A quarterback position specifically?
What do you want to hear? I mean, even if it's a lot of coach speak that you have to parse through, what do you want to hear them? Because right now it's still a battle where they're still competing every day. It's a battle kind of a thing is what they're saying. What do you hope they're saying by like next week or a week and a half?
Well, so the thing is that the things I hope that they say are things that they simply won't say for like tactical, like stealth reasons, right? Like, they're not going to come out and say, yeah, it's definitely Alex Orji, because then Texas is going to be like, all right, we got to prep for Alex Orji. So that would be ideal. You want one guy to grab the job, right? Because if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. But they're not going to say it. So in terms of like what is realistic, there's nothing really that Sherrone's going to say in the next week that's going to like perk my ears up about this spot in particular. Now, he already did it for a couple other spots. Mm-hmm. Like, when his most recent press conference, someone asked him about guys coming forward, and he said Gio El-Hadi and TJ Guy. And those were 2 good names for me, because, there was kind of a rumor that El-Hadi was getting pushed for his starting spot, which I would, like, if that was real, I would have regarded that fairly negatively, because, El-Hadi started a number of games, got 400 snaps as a redshirt freshman, looked like a pretty good player, although he got overwhelmed by the Illinois defensive tackles in his last start in 2021. But that was as a redshirt freshman. Now, 2 years on, he's the kind of guy who, fourth year in the program, redshirt junior, big time recruit, some experience under his belt. He's a guy who should be stepping into the starting lineup and making it almost seamless from Trevor Keegan. And that's what I wanted to hear. And that's basically what we got. So, and then TJ Guy, Michigan needs some depth on the defensive line. He's a guy who's flashed when he's gotten on the field previously, but hasn't, established himself as someone who you can rely on in the rotation. It sounds like he's in the process of doing that. So, some positions I think we're taking for granted, like defensive tackle, we're taking for granted. Safety, even without Rod Moore, I think we're taking for granted. But like the offensive line is replacing all 5 starters, and you want to hear good things about that spot, and you want to hear good things about defensive line depth, because that was a huge issue, not a huge issue last year, a huge benefit last year for Michigan, is everybody could go full go on every snap because they had 9 guys they could play.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head when Sharon gets asked kind of the vague questions. Who are guys that are stepping up, or name some freshmen that are standing out? It's whatever that initial reaction is, that instant reaction is generally the guy or the guys that you want to focus on the most. And TJ Guy has been mentioned by everybody. Like, I think every player that has been asked, whether it's at media day or at press conference, every coach that has been asked about it. So generally
all off season.
Like all offseason, TJ Guy has been mentioned as like more than anybody else, right? So that generally kind of, you piece that together, right? That seems like he's going to be, pun intended, a guy.
And he's another guy that it's so hard to talk about TJ Guy without saying, but he's another dude who's just been all the way all along. He was a Don Brown, pick as a defensive edge, which is always like a good thing, and just he's had this vibe since he got into the program. So it's another, you like to see the things that you saw about a player early paying off. And like to bring it back to the offensive line again, when they have lots of guys, they start saying we got 8 starters, right? And that's what I wanted to hear about them talk about the offensive line and say, like, we got 8 guys, and now Evan Link looks like he could be one of those guys too. So now we got 9 starters, right? They're not really saying that. They're talking more like they have 4 starters. They talk like there's 4 spots nailed down, and they don't know what they're going to do with the right tackle position, which is not what you want to hear, because we know Andrew Gentry had this, he was a great prospect, took 2 years off, but had all this talent and had this ability, and now it's going to be his turn, and we've seen how huge he is, and I would understand it if they said, okay, we want to get Percy and Gentry on the field because they're both awesome. And that would be better to hear than we don't know who's going to start. And, oh, by the way, Link is now a possibility to start at right tackle too. That tells me that they don't like what they've got, that none of those guys are seizing the job.
They said, what did Sharon say about the offensive line? I think he said that there are 9 or 10 guys right now that are in the conversation. So I feel like they know who the candidates are, and someone has to finish rising to the top. I think they're very.
But last year they were like, look, if you're not talking about Trente Jones as a starter, you're wrong. If you're not talking about Miles Hinton as a starter, you're wrong.
I get that. I think that, from left tackle through right guard, they're very set. And I think we're pretty confident they're set from left tackle through right guard. Who wins that right tackle job, and how the bodies kind of line up behind them for the second part of the depth chart is the next question on the offensive line. Maybe it's just me, but you're the guy who fixed your offensive line problems and then became your, offensive coordinator, is now your head coach. And the guys are saying he's still in there working with them a lot. So even if we don't have the answers, or they're not saying it publicly right now, don't you just, if nothing else, kind of have the confidence that when we get to game 1, someone's going to be ready for game 1, and then you build off of that to be ready for Texas?
Well, yeah, I mean, the situation here is very good for a team that's replacing all 5 starters. Now, that's a pretty big caveat, but you have a 5th-year guy in Miles Hinton, or the 6th-year guy actually in Miles Hinton.
5th year, he's a 5th year.
He's a 5th year. Yeah. Who's a former 5-star and has a bunch of starting experience. You have 2 redshirt juniors in El Hadi and Crippen, both of whom are the kind of guys who the program has been talking about for a long time. And for me, like, once you start talking about a guy when you need him, that's just talk. But if you're talking about a guy before you need him, that's meaningful. So those guys have both checked those boxes. You have a guy who was 3rd team All Big Ten a year ago at Northwestern, has a ton of starting experience in Josh Preeb. And all those guys are in their 4th or 5th year of college football. So this isn't, Cesar Ruiz or Ben Bredesen go play as a true freshman. That's not happening. This is closer to like a Wisconsin transition, an old school Wisconsin transition where the guys coming onto the field had been stuck behind very good offensive linemen and were ready to take on the challenge as upperclassmen. And the only exception, I guess, is right tackle. But even there, you have a senior in Jeff Percy and a second-year player in Gentry.
Yeah, I don't know what we got. Gentry's hard for me to keep in mind because he's, he was a recruit so damn long ago.
Yeah. So, but he was, but physically mature guy because he took a 2-year Mormon mission. A guy who, flipped from Virginia under Bronco Mendenhall. Like all of his arrows are pretty good too. And if that's the one question mark on your line that's replacing 5 starters, you're in pretty decent shape. I expect there'll be some hiccups early, but I think the line will round into a fairly decent line, and I don't even know if there's going to be a whole lot of drop off from last year. Now, I think there will be some drop off on the interior, but those tackles were not like high NFL draft picks, right? Like Henderson got drafted, but he got drafted as a guard, and Trente didn't go, and Carson Barnhart didn't go. So the guys that they're replacing were good college players, but not so good that you're like, oh, how are you going to replace JJ McCarthy? Like that's really the question in terms of like talent drop off. I think here there's going to be less cohesion just because the guys hadn't played together for so long, and there's going to be less depth. But I think that if you're confident in 4 or 5 starters in the offensive line, then even if you have returning starters, that's pretty good, right? Like Michigan's offensive line is in a better shape than I think most teams across the country. And the question marks are really like, can we, win the Big Ten again? They're not like, oh, what are we going to get our quarterbacks murdered?
Yeah. I mean, my question is, can they, sorry.
No, I also want to clarify real quick that at center, it's Crippen and Raheem battling. I think it's just that everyone's comfortable that either that wins the job. And it sounds like Crippen's leading, but both are battling really hard for the job, that either one that wins it is going to be really good. It has not been set in stone who wins that job. We know the guards should be Gio and Pre. We know that Hinton should be the left tackle. Center's still a battle, but I think we're confident.
I mean,
that's the job. Crippen's probably going to win the job, but Raheem it's a lot of indications
that's
really
a Barnhart versus Trente thing, right? Where like both of them, if you're hearing about the other guy being that good, because we've known about Crippen for so long, and they were ready to have Crippen start when he was a redshirt freshman. Then they got Olo Olutimi come in, right? But like that was their plan at that point. I think I'm not worried at all about center because of that. Like the way that they've been talking about Crippen, he's got to be so good. And I'm not that worried about right tackle either.
So they were preparing to have Crippen play as a second-year player, so he didn't get a redshirt his first year. They bring in Olu, and then they decide to redshirt Crippen. So all the like garbage time snaps that the second team line got, Raheem Anderson played that year. And I clipped a few of his plays. I thought he did very well. I thought his recognition was excellent. Now it's a small sample size city, of course, but these things tend to bear out. So honestly, I think that if Michigan doesn't import Preeb, he's starting at right guard this year. And I have confidence that if there is an interior OL injury, that he'll be the guy stepping in no matter who it is. Like Raheem Anderson, I think, in terms of people are talking about, we got 6-8 starters. Like Raheem Anderson is the guy who I think is going to be the quote unquote 6th starter. Now he's not a tackle, so he might not get in on those bonus OL snaps. But in terms of, do I have confidence in anyone in the second team? Like he's it. Like he's the guy who I expect will be a player if Michigan needs to use him.
Since you mentioned TJ Guy, we're talking about the defensive line. Another name that gets mentioned a ton when you're asking like general questions to just about anybody is Eno Etta, who is apparently put on like 20. How you guys probably have the chart in front of you? He's put on like 20 or whatever pounds 30 pounds since he's been on campus.
I don't have that one open right now, but yeah, he put on a. He's in the
and he gets mentioned by everybody. So you've got Eno. Trey Pierce has gotten a lot of a mention by a lot of guys. Obviously, Rayshon Benny coming off of the injury as well. It sounds like he's starting to round into shape. and they're behind the two elite defensive tackles, the depth might be behind those guys that they're looking for after all. And I know they want to play more snaps, but I said it like this. I want to kind of balance, put the schedule into a couple categories. One category are the games like mainly the big three games, the Texas game, the Ohio State game, the Oregon game, where you're probably going to have your guys playing up extra more snaps than other games. And then there's other games where I don't want to see Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the field in the second half. So who are the other guys behind him taking all those snaps? And we were curious about that, trying to figure out what that depth would look like. But feels like they're getting comfortable with maybe having three big bodies behind him in Benny, Pierce, and Etta.
Yeah, and Benny's a guy who was I don't think he was a top 100 recruit, but he was close, and he was a guy who saw a lot of snaps last year. Now, he didn't do as well as he did in 22, but he flashed here and there. And as a guy who's, maturing and becoming a upperclassman defensive tackle, those guys often take a long time to develop into really good players. And Michigan is blessed that Mason Graham needed no time whatsoever, and Kenneth Grant is the sort of freak who runs down Katrin Allen in the open field. So, but those are usually atypical performances, right? Like anyone short of a 5-star, and those guys should have been 5 stars, is going to take some time to really become an all Big Ten level player. And for Benny, I think this could be a year where he starts exploring that ceiling of his. And, then you just want one guy from the pursuers to kind of pop up and be a rotation player. And I think Michigan is likely to get that.
Yeah, I think right now, we're coming down from such a high point, right? Where you had Chris Jenkins in that group as well last year, and Benny's going to have to step in and take the Jenkins role. Benny was great last year up until he got to Alabama, and then he just got crushed in 2 different plays, and then the second one he got injured. He's coming back from that injury, so they've had an offseason where they were not talking about, because you don't talk about players when they're injured in this program. So I was waiting for them to say something about Pierce. They finally did. What they're saying about Pierce is that he's hard to move, right? He's a Mozzie Smith kind of guy. He's probably not Mozzie Smith as a senior. He's probably Mozzie Smith as a junior level player, but that's good. They got a guy in Trey Pierce. He's not going to be as disruptive. You're going to have a drop off from Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant when you put in the third string defensive tackles. And then the other guy, when they go to Etta, that's telling me that they don't have anyone else. That like Ike Awuna and all the other guys that they've brought in for that position, they don't like, because Etta was going to be the backup strong side end, and he was tracking to be a really good one. Like they were mentioning him right alongside TJ Guy most of the time. And I think that was great. And he looks like that. He looks the part. He could be a Mike Morris. If they're having him bulk up and play defensive tackle, that's just like them saying, okay, Mike Morris has to bulk up and play inside. That's what they're telling us. And can Etta do it? He couldn't do it in spring. He was getting pushed around a lot. Maybe he's stronger now and he's gotten better at it, but it's telling me that they don't like their depth after that there's probably a hard line right there. And they're going to try to make it work with Etta, and they're probably going to make it work against some teams. But, if you've got USC, you got a offensive line at Texas, you got Oregon's offensive line, Ohio State's got a great offensive line, and you're not going to want to get down to your fourth defensive tackle on a team that wants to play 3 defensive tackles against 2 tight ends. So I don't know if any of the teams on Michigan's schedule want to attack them the way that you should attack a team like that, but they're definitely not super deep. Now, let me throw a caveat on that before I stop talking here. Kirby Smart just went on and said that he's upset about the depth on his team too. And that made me feel so much better, because, if you have 5 stars on top, and then you're a little bit worried about your 4th defensive tackle, everyone is. So, okay, that I haven't been able to look at the depth of other teams, and they're probably in the same position Michigan is.
Yeah, we are. When you're talking about your 4th and 5th string, 4th and 5th guy on a list, and not the 1st and 2nd guy on the list, we've come a long way in the last, say, 4 years, guys, having these conversations and what the question marks look like going into a season. We have more of this conversation on the other side of the break. More of the MGoBlog Roundtable coming up here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK. The Ticket.
Clear on radio.
All right, good stuff.
Still on anyone who's watching on video is still watching us, by the way. So probably should fill with something here.
I know we usually do. Did you guys? I was talking about this last hour. I'm assuming you guys see the Message Board Geniuses Twitter thread that comes across.
No,
Sometimes
It's one of my it's one of my favorite follow. Like it's hilarious, and this is maybe the greatest one I've ever seen. They screenshot message board stuff, and they got one from you guys about they show erecting a Jim Harbaugh statue, giving the middle finger to somebody posted on your message board. We should erect a statue of Jim Harbaugh with giving a middle finger to the NCAA logo. That was on your somebody posted it somewhere. I'm pretty sure it was on your message board. It looked like it based on the screen grab. But this one was from UGAsports.com. And this guy wrote, I'm going to be honest, I don't like that Carson Beck got his degree this summer, and now we've got Kirby celebrating it on Twitter. The Clemson game is in less than 3 weeks. This summer is not the time to sit in some decrepit room in Park Hall listening to some random clown in a tweed jacket who never lettered in bleep run his mouth about Tom Sawyer or some author like him. It was time to focus on the season, to focus on Alabama and focus on and Texas and Florida. And he goes, it's a crisis of culture because the guy got his degree at, a college athlete.
How dare.
How dare. It reminded me, I don't know if you guys ever heard, we had a caller at a post-game show a bunch of years ago, some random dude from Toledo. I wish I remembered his name, but he calls in screaming after a loss like 12 years ago. This is Michigan. We care about football. We don't care about engineering. And I'm like, thanks for the call. And then I go, actually, we kind of care about both. There's a way to care about both. But apparently at Georgia, there's a fan that's mad that their players graduate.
Followers
on Twitter.
I mean,
my favorite followers on Twitter. That's
every athlete here is not necessarily a scholar, but I mean, we've got to talk to some of the athletes at Michigan before, which is a very new thing for us. That's not normally in our wheelhouse. But we got to sit down with a bunch of them at the golf outing, and they don't get every single reference in the world, but we threw some intelligent things out, some educated things out there, and everyone was hitting them out of the park. And I was, I got to meet some of them when we were not on the radio with them and talk to them, and they're regular Michigan students. And I think that's, I'm not responding to the message board geniuses guy here. I'm just saying this is something that I think Michigan fans might not think about all the time, but they are regular college students, probably past where most regular college students are, especially the older ones that they allow to talk to us, right? Like once you're getting to Max Bredesen, he's near the end of his college career. But they're not they're not automatons. They're not like things from your video game, right? These are just college guys.
Yeah, they are people. They do have lives.
Yeah.
Scott, I will tell you firsthand. I went. You can listen on the podcast. The Philly cheesesteak fries. Don't walk, run for those. They'll be at some of the concessions. Those are goated, as the kids say.
With the sauce.
With the sauce, on God 100. They're fire.
You're right. Ryan said with the sauce, and then he pieced out. Like that was his mic drop.
Mic drop. Sauce. Mic drop.
Here he goes. With the sauce.
Goated with the sauce, and just realized, wait a minute. I'm not going to
do better than that on this episode. I'm out of here.
Wrong generation here. Wrong generation. Hold on a second here. You're not supposed to be saying that. Those kind of.
Brian, that was an excellent mic drop.
No cap. You were like goated with the sauce, and then you and then you went offline.
Well, what are you doing?
All right, we're coming back.
I was kicked off the internet for being bad at it.
Yeah, no cap. Dog.
Stand by, guys. Come back on radio.
No cap, dog.
You can't say that. Samaj can say it.
Welcome back to the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTK, the ticket online at WTKA.com. Always having fun during the breaks here on the MGoBlog Roundtable or with the MGoBlog Roundtable guys. We're back here on the radio, and guys, we're going through talking a little bit about Michigan's depth chart and talking some of the positions where, questions and things that Sharon had to say, and also kind of taking comments on what other people have had to say. One of the spots on the field that we went into the offseason talking about as a question mark was the spot opposite Will Johnson. And it seems like every time that gets brought up, Jair Hill's name gets brought up first. and a lot. Is that what you guys are hearing?
Yeah. I mean, there's still some questions. He was a guy who came in last year, had some playing time, but was fairly raw and wasn't able to supplant Josh Wallace, which, I mean, the way Josh Wallace played, I don't know who was going to supplant him a year ago. But, it's a complicated defense, and it's going to be take a minute for a freshman to get his head around it. But physically, he's everything that you want in a quarterback, except, he's going to be playing opposite Will Johnson in all likelihood, and he's really everything you want in a quarterback. But absent Will Johnson, he's pretty close to the ideal. So, he's the guy who you want out there early. And, he's going to have some issues. He's going to have to learn the ropes, but he's a guy with a ton of potential.
Yeah, I mean, the game against Texas is going to be one where you'd love to have Jair Hill at, I think they're probably pushing at him. My imagination of how it's going, because I'm not getting insider information on this, is that they are trying to have Jair just, get himself ready so that he is at that Will Johnson level as quickly as Will Johnson was. And Johnson was a freak as far as that kind of stuff. He studied this stuff when he was in high school. And Jair, he's got a long way to go from where he was as a high schooler. He was a free safety in high school playing for Kankakee, and it was not a, he didn't get to develop a lot of the cornerback skills, not to mention getting to know the Ravens system. But Michigan, I feel like Michigan, just more than anything in the world, they want him to just pop and be ready to be Will Johnson and have two elite corners. And the way that they're talking about it sounds like he's not quite there yet, but they are certainly banking on him being there. And obviously next year he's going to have to be the dude. But then they also keep talking about Amir Hall, who is Josh Wallace but fast. Every single time they mention him, and like that's a find. Like if you can go into the the lower ranks of college football and pull out a guy like that. When I did the scouting on them, I thought that Amir Hall was really the cornerback that they picked up who would probably be more valuable to them now. And was it Ricky Johnson's the other one? Looked more kind of like a wild hitter who they see the athleticism, but he needs maybe a year to get adjusted to the program. So I think those are probably, if you have three guys, you're ready to go at cornerback. If you have two guys, you could be in trouble.
And they're going to be tested. We were talking about this yesterday when Steve Clark was doing his Oregon preview. Oregon has a couple of guys, but you've got Egbuka, you've got Isaiah Bond at Texas. They're going to face 3-4 of the top 5 receivers or 6 receivers in the country this year, potentially. And I know Will's going to get most of that assignment, but Oregon's got 2 of them, so Will can't cover them both. And it goes back to what Ron English and I talked about years ago when we were talking about building a defense. Think about this when you're Wink, and maybe this is part of the reason why Wink was so excited to get the job. Ron English said, and I would talk about building a defense, and he'd talk about the 2 different ways to really build a defense. One is from the outside in, so you have corners on the outside that can lock you down, and then it allows you to do other creative things with your other 9 players. Or the other way is to start with up front in the middle with 2 guys that can really eat up. Really, is it 4 blockers essentially because you're just changing the math because you have dominant guys inside. And here comes Wink. He comes in. He's got Will Johnson on the outside, and he's got Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the inside, and he's got all these parts kind of to start with. He just has to plug that last spot on the outside of corner. But also, it's not just that, right, guys? Because they got to figure out nickel. It sounds like Zeke Berry's been leading the way at nickel. But if it's Zeke Berry at nickel, you've got Makari Page and Quentin Johnson at safety. What's behind those guys?
Well, they imported 4 different safeties after Rod Moore got hurt. So they have options that have experience, and I think those guys will be the depth. You don't bring in, Mangum from Michigan State and the kid from Tennessee whose name escapes, Walker, without expecting those guys to at least be on the 2 deep, right? So I figure that those guys might not play as much early as the safety rotation did last year, just because same reason. It's a complicated defense. You need some time to get your head around it. But I think, maybe by midseason you're going to see a rotation somewhat similar to what we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, they want to rotate their safeties. They want to and I think Wesley Walker's gonna play. I think that Jaden Mangum's gonna play. I really like Jaden Mangum, by the way. When I watched this film, I was like, okay, this is a dude who Michigan State's defense is just he's just wasting on that defense because he's got that intelligence to kind of pick up these things. Mangum, they're both going to need a little bit of time to get adjusted, and I think that's why Quentin Johnson has the inside track to start at the beginning of the season. But they're going to be a rotation. You saw Keon Sapp last year, how much he was their fourth safety, right? So that tells you that they're going to be using those guys. It's more about the nickel position. I think is just going to feel different. Now Zeke Berry, they're all talking about him like he's awesome. They're not completely giving it up. Jaden McBurrows, we've seen him play. Mikey Samer still pointed at him and said, stay tuned. So we know that Jaden McBurrows can play as well. But we don't have the Mikey Samer still, Rod Moore guys out there who are just pointing and saying, here's exactly what their play is going to be, everybody, right? And that wasn't Signs. That wasn't Connor Stallions. That was Mikey Samer still. And that ability that they had is not going to be there. And that's how they dealt with, Roma Dunze last year. So when they had, and you saw early in the season last year, they actually had some breakdowns and they, gave up some things to Bowling Green. They had some open receivers that they weren't able to hit. So when you go back and look at last season, they were not in Alabama / Washington / Ohio State form at the beginning of the season. They got there. And I don't think Zeke Berry is going to be that kind of person. So when Wink looks at the talent he has, I think he's going to want to man up more. I think want to say, Jair, just go cover this guy everywhere you got. You got Will Johnson. You can get away with that too. It's not going to be they don't want to just do sim pressures all the time. They're going to want to actually bring pressures. And you're already overwhelmed dealing with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. So how are you going to deal with somebody else who adds themselves? You got Jayshawn Barham coming in on you. You have, I think it's going to feel different. And people think that's Don Brown. It's not. It's Wink Martindale. And I think when you look at the talent on this roster, they probably are more of a Wink Martindale team than a Mike McDonald team or a Jesse Minter team. That's, I know Michigan loves our sim pressures, and we probably should go back to doing that against Ohio State for other reasons. But, I think when you see Texas, you're not going to want to let them sit around pick at you. They're not going to want them. You don't want to hope that your defense is going to be able to pick a guy up and then do another switch and then do another switch.
Seth, do you have any additional biases towards Jaden Mangum and hoping that he succeeds or something?
He went to Groves. He's my first scholarship football player from Groves in Michigan history. We thought it was going to be Avery Gatch, and then all of a sudden Mangum comes. But I'm not. That's not my bias. And it's really, when I watched this film, I was like, this guy stood out. And Michigan State found some defensive players before. You don't have to pretend that okay, anyone who's at Michigan State is bad. We've seen a lot of good players come out of there before. And I thought, Michigan State's defense just couldn't use him the way they needed to. That he was back there and he was making plays, but they were just getting pushed around on the edges all the time. So there was not, and their linebackers were too slow. So how are you going to attack them? Well, get the safety going somewhere else, and then they'll, attack the linebacker, whoever the linebacker's covering. And I mean, now that he's not the one guy that the offense is trying to get rid of, right? Because, you go watch J.J. McCarthy carving up Michigan State secondary. He's throwing wherever Mangum isn't. Right now that he's not that guy, he's going to be factor more. And I think, it'll take him some time, but he's the Keon Sapp in this team. He's the one who's going to be coming down and making an incredible hit in the bowl game. And you're going to like, whoa, where'd this guy come from?
All right, as we wrap up our football conversation here on the MGoBlog Roundtable on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050, WTK, the ticket online at WTK.com. We've kind of circled around and hit a bunch of different positions. I want to circle back to the offensive side and get to running back. Obviously, we all know Donovan Edwards is the headliner. Khalil Mullings is right behind him. And then it's a matter of kind of, shuffling the depth chart behind them. I kind of look at it as two categories, right? I don't want to truly define them as thunder and lightning, but it's kind of like one guy is the big power back and the other guy is the breakaway kind of back. And it feels like you have Ben Hall backing up Khalil Mullings, and Jordan Marshall's been getting a lot of mention by Sharon Moore and others. And he might be the guy backing up Donovan Edwards. Is that a fair way to look at the running back position right now?
Yeah, I'd say so. And for me, the most interesting thing about the running back spot is how often do the two starters play together? because we saw a little bit of that last year, and it looked extremely intriguing because Kalel Mullings is a 240-pound guy with excellent mobility, and when he was tasked as a blocker, he wrecked people.
Yeah.
And then Donovan Edwards, he can split out wide and basically be a wide receiver. So if you see those two guys on the field, what personnel grouping is that? Do you have your nickel on the field or not? Because if you do have your nickel on the field, that's a bad matchup if they run the ball. And if you have a third linebacker on the field and Donovan Edwards goes wide, you're not running man coverage. So to me, there might be some room for, the third and fourth guys in the running back room, because there might be a lot of snaps where Michigan has two running backs on the field.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to this play from the Rose Bowl. We were talking about how smart that game was. They put both guys on the field. They have Mullings out there, and they have Edwards split out wide as well. And Mullings actually goes out wide in the slot, and then they motion him in from the slot, and he comes in to crack a linebacker, and that guy just gets destroyed. No, an end. It's a defensive end.
It was Dallas Turner.
Yeah.
The first guy off the board on defense in the NFL draft. And to be fair to Dallas Turner, he wasn't expecting to get absolutely blown up from the side on that play, but he did.
Right.
I mean, Mullings, Pro Football Focus only has him for 25 run blocks on the season. And he had the block of the week upon further review 3 times. He had a blitz.
Ratio. That's a good ratio.
He had a blitz pickup against Minnesota where he pancaked a blitzing linebacker. I've never seen that before. It wasn't like the guy got up in the air or anything. No, he just took him on, stood him up and put him on the ground. It was wild. And, when Mullings gets the ball and runs, it's Jerome Bettis. It's those guys who are 240, 250 pounds and should not be able to move like the way they do. So I'm extremely excited to see what Mullings can do now that he'll have a major role on this offense.
Yeah, the running back room is it's interesting. Behind that, though, obviously, with Jordan Marshall, some of the other younger guys, hopefully they don't all get lost in the shuffle and they find roles for some of those other guys too, because you don't want to.
Leon Franklin came back. We pulled up the roster, and all of a sudden he was back on there. I thought he was going to transfer, and Tavere Dunlap is, he's fallen behind these guys before. Cole Cabana, I feel bad for it, but he's a redshirt freshman. There's going to be snaps in the future for him. Jordan Marshall, if he is popping now, if they're talking about him, okay, we're going to have to get him on the field, that means a lot for Jordan Marshall. That means that this guy's if you have a guy popping like that, they're we have to use this dude, that means you've got a quorum kind of guy, because you do not need that guy, right? We've seen what Ben Hall can do, and that's your third back, right? And you have Donovan Edwards and you have Kalel Mullings, and you're going to want to use those guys as much as you can. So, that's an impressive thing to hear from a Jordan Marshall standpoint. For those of us who are going to invest in Ben Hall jerseys, it's it's a little bit of a downer because they're a little bit more similar players. But if you're telling me that they're going to have Marshall back up Edwards and Ben Hall back up Mullings, okay, that at least makes some sense to me. And you can get 4 backs on the field. You're not going to have 5 backs who are regularly helping you. But if your fourth back, if you don't have 4 backs, remember at the end of 2022, we have Donovan Edwards with one hand. They go down to Stokes, and he was not seeing his holes. And then, you have Gash. Isaiah Gash is the one who has to make the catch to save our season in 22 against Illinois. And that's, if that's now Marshall, then let's go.
Yeah, and one of the things, a phrase that I kind of started using last year, second half backs. It's kind of like we were talking about with the defensive tackles. There are games where you don't want to see Mason or Kenny G play any snaps in the second half, because why put the wear and tear on them? There are games where you don't want to see the top 2 backs play in the second half. You want their helmets and shoulder pads off by halftime, right? Arkansas State, you don't need to go out in the second half. So who are those next guys? And it's a chance to figure out who's behind Hall and who's behind Marshall, if those are the next 2.
The third back matters. The third back is Kalel Mullings last year. That's a real role on the team. Now, as Brian mentioned, PFF only has him for 25 blocks, and that's not enough. Right, the usage needs to go up for that kind of player, but that's your third back. Your third back this year is it Marshall or is it Hall? Either way, it's a guy that we've been really excited to see, or should be really excited to see. So Okay, I mean that's what we're talking about right there. 3 backs are really part of the rotation. I think people forget that your third back is basically your second teamer for any other position.
And I think as Brian talked about, with the creativity that is at their disposal on offense, there's room for 4 probably to get snaps. Obviously, there's a tiering of how many snaps they each get.
We hope so. They should be looking at multiple, because what are they going to do? Put receivers out there? We haven't even talked about the receivers.
I know we didn't get to receivers, so we have like 90 seconds. They haven't talked a lot about receivers. I don't think at some of the press conferences there hasn't been a ton of.
Because your second receiver is Fred Moore. It's like they've got one guy that's like a receiver right now, one guy that we've seen play a lot.
Well, you've got 2 because you have Samaj as well. So
yeah,
I mean, I think if you're asking me what the most common personnel grouping it's going to be Morris and Samaj with Colston Loveland. And then, pick 2 from Bredesen, Mullings, and Edwards. So they don't have depth at receiver. That's going to be an issue. But what they do have is they do have a tight end who could play wide receiver and a running back who could play wide receiver. So I think you're going to see, Edwards get 50 catches this year. I think you're going to see Colston Loveland lead the team in receptions, possibly the country in terms of tight end receptions. Like, if there's ever been a lock for the Mackey Award, I think he's it. So the position group itself is thin, but I think Michigan has enough guys playing other positions who can also catch passes that they'll be fine.
Guys, appreciate your time as always. We are running out of time for this Thursday edition of the Michigan Insider and the MGoBlog Roundtable, but don't worry, the football conversation continues. We're 16 days away until the start of the Michigan football season. Appreciate your time as always. Also, thanks to my guy Miz on the other side of the glass for helping me out here on this Thursday edition of the show. Tomorrow, Friday edition of the show, we're going to have another Behind the Uniforms. We're going to hear from Alex Orgy, so get tuned for that. Stay tuned for that tomorrow. You're going to hear his story, plus John U. Bacon, and a whole lot more. Thanks for listening. This has been the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA Ann Arbor, a Cumulus station.